crack into it. Look, Wayne, first of all, I mean, I think, are we? Excellent. Yes, I missed her completely. So welcome. So look, I mean, first of all, look, I mean, I think on behalf of us both, I'd like to really thank you all for the hard work which you've obviously put in since last time we met. We set you a bit of hard work and appreciate that it was quite a bit of work. But I think all of those outputs are going to be very useful to us in terms of deliberation and just understanding, things a lot better. And it was really, I think, quite gratifying, in particular, to see the progress that have been made in the joint witness conferencing as well. That was really good. So top marks there, because that makes our job an awful lot easier too. So look, Ms. Tancock, I think we are probably in your hands in terms of how you'd like to play this. I'm assuming that you'll maybe lead us through, some of the salient points of the stuff which has been provided. I mean, we have read through it. I've even breezed through your recent one.
Fantastic.
I'm not sure Commissioner Hendrick has had much of a chance at all. So, yeah.
Right. Okay. I had proposed a timetable for the resumed hearing in one of the memorandum. I just thought before the applicant commenced its reply, which I guess this sort of would be, is whether it would be appropriate to hear from the council first.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ms. Ryden has obviously provided her view on the minutes, and then I think Mr. Trott is here, so he may have a few things to say. So would you like to start there?
I'm very happy to start there. And I think possibly the first question before you get into it is, you indicated that there was going to be a response from the policy team. Is that correct?
Yes, I am happy to have some further discussion with you on that, perhaps a little bit offline, but as yet I haven't heard nothing back from them.
Right. Had they indicated a time that they might?
I have provided them one, and
okay, all right.
Just been sending emails because now I just need this to want to demonstrate now too. So.
And I just went on to check. Getting a new computer means on my my signature's not there. on my,
but that,
it's on
yeah,
my
so
own.
we
I can
do
get my wife to send
have.
it to me.
You're still breaking up.
Okay, well, do you need another 5 minutes to speak, get that to a second?
Oh, I've had a
the
look
copy
here.
of it
Yeah.
is like ready to go, just
Yeah.
the signatures, that's all.
So Alice has provided
signed
there,
it, I
and
signed it.
I'm quite happy for you
We're good.
to use that one now. As I
Okay,
said, it was
great.
purely the fact that on my screensaver, I don't get my signature.
Yes. Are you happy for me to talk about this, or would you like me to send you a not entirely signed copy?
Oh,
So you can
no,
do
look,
it now? Or?
just talk about it. Just
Okay,
so, yeah, and look, we'll deal with the tidy up the formalities later. Yeah, no worries.
Yeah. And it will have a set of conditions with it as well. So Ms. Hanson, Whitmore and I met. So this is where this document is obviously come from. We have reached agreement on the majority of conditions. The outstanding concerns relate to timeframes around council certification of the management plans, and discussion around block 104. There's still some design elements which Mr. Schroeder will discuss, and the proposal that council put in for it to be listed in a dedicated road. Really, where those are, Mr. Hanson and I didn't discuss those in detail because at the same time the conferencing was happening with the transport experts, and we were hoping that there would be some things resolved there, which there were, and there's just I guess two outstanding in regards to that. And then there is an area outstanding in respect to the conditions in relation to 44 Shepherd Street. that's being proposed in terms of retaining or replacing of the pine trees. My view is that I obviously consider that the effects from what could be from construction, but then also what could end up being built on 119 are acceptable in terms of 44 Seco Street, and that's the condition that Mr. Hanson proposed is included. I don't think it's necessary, but if it is included, I think that there does need to be some changes to the wording. I don't think it makes exactly what is measurable proposed, and understanding what exactly it is the applicant will be doing and what council will be monitoring. So from the document you've seen from Mr. Hanson and myself in regards to those planning documents and the plan changes and things like that, I think we're getting on the same page with a lot of that stuff. So I think the bigger discussion is relating to this lot of argument. Don't do one time.
So if you were to run with a condition, not necessarily the wording that Mr. Hanson has proposed, but so would you just like need a little bit of time to tidy up the wording of the meeting? Is that what you're saying?
I'm happy to supply some reading if that's the case, but I think it would probably be in line with some of the other conditions that we've got around planting and things like that. If that's what that intention of that align.
I mean, I think we'd probably like the option of accepting whether or not accepting your view that it's not necessary, but if a condition was to be imposed, having an agreed one would be good.
And if you are in the application for me, or we can take a break and you can read that, I think
Sure. Yeah, and look, I mean,
and
look, as I said at the outset, I'm very, very thankful for your analysis of the policy environment. Yeah, that's.
I think it's how. I think it's probably how both Mr. Hanson and I get, a bit of a broad view of everything that's going on, and certainly, that if not we're doing that, bits and pieces that obviously come out through the process. That,
and look, from our perspective as the panel, just making a decision in full understanding of what the background is just really important to us in terms of the decision. So as I said, very grateful. Right.
So don't know what you want me to really outline, but I'll just highlight sort of the overall position of where we're at the moment. These guys can correct me if I'm wrong. So the issues on Tiaco Street have largely been resolved. In my mind, we've got an agreement on the developer agreement in principle, signed by all parties. So the Tiaco Street issue is resolved in terms of the the shed.
Sorry, just on that, unless the commissioners had any questions on that statement, just confirming that we've removed the conditions that relate to the Tiaco Street, and council's also agreed that those works don't form part of the consent. So I think for your purposes, you don't have to consider them.
Yes, no, that's well understood. So that's it seems like a pretty useful result.
Yeah. And then the shared path, so we've agreed on some matters, as you can see in the joint statement, but my point is still the outstanding, but we've still got a difference of opinion on the surfacing and on the lighting. And my concern is still the road safety, stability of that shared path. So I've still got concerns there as outlined in my evidence.
Actually, before we ask any questions about shared path, there is a question I had about the joint statement on the developer agreement. At paragraph 6, with regard to the use of street by construction traffic for the project, it was agreed that construction traffic can be appropriately accepted through the construction traffic management plan. So and then it was agreed, paragraph 7 was agreed that construction traffic safety will also be limited to no more than 200 vehicle movements per day. So I'm assuming that's going to explain to a condition I can see.
Yes, and I think we all agreed on those conditions.
Okay, that's good.
I'll check on the two first. Read my words.
They're all
Yes, so Mr. Potter, do you want to take us back to the shared path statement and your outstanding areas of discomfort or disagreement? I get the impression that maybe it's not necessarily full disagreement, but maybe some lack of comfort, complete comfort on things.
That's right. Yeah. So there's one item, it's not numbered. On page 3 of the joint written statement where we talk about alternative routes via existing road network. So my concern there is basically being overcome by the agreement on the Echo Street works. So my concern was that if the works didn't happen up the road, the Echo Street would be as safe to use as a shared path that's lit, will become lit tonight. Something for that, so that's largely gone away.
In terms of the likelihood of that circumstance arising, I mean, pretty low.
No, because the trigger is the 224 issue for payment. So
and then it's in Neil's control.
Right, yeah. So it depends how many houses can be built and occupied and the time it takes us to do the upgrade, which in my mind it should be a minimal number, really. Yeah. So limited effect for few people until we've got the works in place.
Yeah, and as I say, I mean, until those properties are actually occupied,
yeah,
and that shared path isn't used anyway.
You wouldn't be operating the shared path.
No. Yeah, all right. So that's a slight area of disagreement or lack of comfort, but it's a very low likelihood of any.
Yeah, that's right. So it was really the pedestrians, the cyclists using Echo Street as a safe alternative. I wouldn't agree with that, but I would agree with it if the works were in place. So that's basically what I'm saying. The Echo Street works. That has gone away now with the agreement. Place. And
Page 5, I think.
yeah, yeah, so that was the page 4, really, the safety concern of the grade surfacing, particularly loss of control of cyclists when braking. So that's and the bend that some of the bends might have the greatest concern. So that change 0 was probably the worst, sharpest bend on the 90-degree bend.
Just a quick question. In the joint witness conference, was there any discussion about like a warning sign at the bottom of that grade?
I think we started to talk about delineation and signage, but we didn't actually carry on that discussion.
There could be signage, you could have like chevron signs, but the fact that I mean I think there'll be a fence the, you know, there'll be visual
Mm.
view and the tape and the sealed, that section will be sealed.
And you're proposing a street light.
Sure.
So
Mr. Greenshield said recommended wayfinding signage as part of everything. So that may, is it in?
Yeah, if I was going to politely,
Which one's it?
but it's just on the conditions I had enough to say and so.
So then there was a, on page 4 again, the crushed gravel use and design, still a disagreement on the ease of use of a gravel surface by mobility impaired. And if the concern is that it shouldn't look like a road or behave like a road or look too urban, there are materials, in my opinion, that are out there that could be used as an alternative that do look like gravel, but are actually a bound material. So this is perfectly paved gravel, resin type bound surfaces that could be used.
Is it really? Look, I think I probably don't quite understand it as to what the material is like. I mean, how loose is it?
So it'd be compacted, crushed gravel, down, very tight, it's new.
Is it quite small grade gravel?
Small chip, yeah.
It's small chip.
So it'd be probably get 40, so, you know, the biggest possible dimension of the chip would be 40 mils, so.
Oh, so it's a reasonable size.
So it'd be, but it will be compacted, so that, you know, you don't have that stuff sticking out. Yeah, when you compact it, that binds together quite well. Uniform.
It's a reasonable surface to ride on, but it does have maintenance issues. That's one of the problems, that it will rut and wash out if the drainage is quite right. Sometimes you get some rutting occurring over time. It's more difficult, it's not intensive to repair, but you have to repair it probably more often. You have to do an asphalt or concrete part, and you know, the holes forming in it, some dips and things like that. Not just be water ingress because it's not a sealed surface, it's permeable.
And just refresh my memory about, I mean, was your concern over the entire shed path or just in relation to particular parts?
Just the hillier section with the bends in the straighter flat section. I'm just sort of concerned about that being on the surface. It's just where you know, you've got the bends and it's not really just a combination of those factors was the concerns that would be surface to ride on with brake with speed potentially.
Is your diagram. Just so I guess so we can understand what sort of level of works it would actually look like. In terms of what, because obviously there is this part that they've got sealed and then
Yeah.
these are separate ones, but these other areas I think will be good to understand what particular parts perhaps are.
So
Yeah.
sheet 16, this lot was put forward as a result of where they got to encompass and work the amendments that were agreed.
Different numbers, yeah.
Yes,
So I'm
there
just
was-
thinking,
There was two, that was the sketch plan that we did, but then we incorporated that.
So those are the ones.
Okay,
that-
right.
So those will go,
It's the same information that we have.
That's what you handed out. Do you remember
Yes.
those?
that's the one that I'm looking at.
And amendments that were agreed at the end of page 5. of the document.
so yeah, I mean, really my issue was,
Just for on this one and I could trade with them.
I mean, it's not really. So I mean, the bend at change 50 and 60 is quite sharp, so that was one concern. overall, I still have concerns about the whole path was gravel. Wasn't going to be sealed. So it wasn't really any one particular area as such I was really concerned about. That bend would be one, essentially in the bend at the bottom, but that's largely been resolved by the street light and the extension of the hard surface there. But it's just that overall fact that it's a gravel path and it's not lit section.
And so this is the part that's running from
Change
that
30
bend
to
okay, 200 rather than the in the southern.
Yeah, the southern section is, you know, outside the road, it's pretty flat level. It's really,
Okay.
so some lit in that gravel surface, I didn't see as many issues with that. So,
I was just going to ask a question because in terms of your reasoning for why, I know in your evidence in chief you refer to Ostrodes and it's referred to again in the joint witness in statement. I was just curious, remind me, how do you apply Ostrodes? Is it a minimum standard or is it a guideline or is it something between?
So NZCA have a website, a web page called Cycle Network Guidance. So that's basically a design guide, best practice guide for design and shape paths of cycling facilities in New Zealand. And because it's a web page, there's quite a lot of detail in there, but not as much as in Ostrodes. And basically what it says is if you want more detail on this, refer to Ostrodes Part 6A for further guidance. So it is a guidance document, but to say it is the best practice guidance document that you would use for geometric design of roads and cycle paths. Sorts of facilities. I can't really go to anything else. There are other guidelines like the NZCA, but Ostrodes is the pretty comprehensive design guide that those engineers would use to design roads and cycle networks in New Zealand. Even NZS 454 is not as comprehensive as the Ostrodes guides in terms of geometric standards.
So just to follow that then, is in terms of, I guess, that northern section that we've just been talking about north of right angle bend, is your I guess, position based on Ostrodes or is it based on your own personal professional experience?
Combination of both, really. You know, so there's the Ostrodes standards that says this is the best practice design what you should try and achieve, and knowing from a safety point of view what sort of things are raised at the safety audits and just a general feel for how safe this would be to use for cycling. A surface that may work loose over time, may pothole over time and is unlit. It's a really long-lasting facility that we should probably be aiming for in terms of residential development. And I hear the argument about the rural setting of this, but it is changing in nature. I do think it's more becoming, it's happening more like an urban development, like a pretty urban road at one end and a semi-rural road at one end of this path connects the two. So I struggle a bit with that. This is rural and it should stay rural. Two pretty major roads either end with a bit major residential roads, but they're pretty standard construction. There's nothing special about them really. So it's flexible environment. That's just and I think personally, we know if we're trying to get people out of cars, we want people to walk and cycle more, when it's right with the baby on the back. This should be use a gravel path that's a bit hilly and probably not sure looking at going, no, I'm not going to ride my bike down there in my opinion. I should just jump in the car. So just trying to get a safe, good level of facility for the future residents of that.
And Mr. Trotter, you suggested that there's a range of different servicing materials which might be more appropriate. So a question for Mr. Taylor, I mean, have you looked at those materials?
I'm not aware of them being used in the Kelvin Coast for any trails, so we haven't any experience. I'm not sure if council have got any experience with those particular surface treatments. So yeah, we do know in terms of porous pavement, or other developments that we've had over the last few years, that those can also break up and have the same issues that basically it's a porous surface that's bound together to allow water to travel through, but those holes, it's not being bound together, mean that tires or things passing over it, it can break that bond and then the chip becomes loose.
So it's kind of something like that, or asphalt, nothing in between really.
Yeah,
Chip seal is the-
chip seal is probably the other one. That's what's been used on the expressway. I guess it's not really used that extensively through the cup because I would
most of the leisure routes are gravel. We have got more urban parts of concrete or asphalt around the town centres and on roads like Mansell Road. Maybe the leisure routes, the leisure sort of facilities. I disagree. In my mind, like I said, this is part of the roading network, which is connecting two residential roads together. So, in my view, it should be more like an urban form of a shared park. So,
Okay, thanks for that.
So really no markups on here.
No, it ended up just being that entire section really extra sheet 16.
Okay, that's
But I guess particular concerns noted around the 50 to 60.
So, Mr. Trotter, so still on page 5, you say that the extra 10 metres of seal, 30 metres in total, I think around that sharp end, that's addressed some of your concerns?
Yeah.
Particularly with the lighting involved as well.
yeah, that's right.
So that, like it.
Yeah, one other thing to point out is we did agree on a narrower path. It was set at 3 metres and standard sort of width for these sort of shared paths is 2.5 metres that we apply on the post. So we thought that would be a good benefit to bring that in a bit and put it away from the spaces on the corners. So shuffling off some of the points on the corners as well to provide a bit more clearance for the cyclists.
Jesus. I'm
Very demanding.
I'm sorry, I'd love to get the
I just want,
attachment.
no, that's okay. I'm just
Just like how my legal person.
no, some people just say we're still waiting on it. I wonder whether it might be a good idea to hear from Harriet. So keep on track of issues around your car.
Mhm.
That makes sense. Then
Yes,
we
no,
can
that's
deal with it as a topic and move on.
Totally. That sounds good.
So Ms. Fraser has provided a addendum just to deal with issues that are still outstanding. But before we do that, can I just briefly ask you to take the commissioners through the, I think it was minute 2, requested some cross sections. And so Mr. Taylor's done those, and I just think it's probably quite a good idea just to refresh our minds about that before we launch into discussions around secrets.
Sure.
And so use the plan. It's directed by the commissioners. And some survey work to confirm the grades of the shared path that runs alongside the Calvin Expressway. So sheet 1 is shows the plan view of those. So
This is the other.
This is,
these are-
Is it?
I've
it
got
was-
this here. This is shooting.
So you can see obviously the two ramps coming down, and so getting north and south along the expressway. There is a long section of that corresponding path. It is 6. With the grades of each of the various sections shown. Those paths are sealed, so chip seal, and as it approaches the connection to Otanga Road is concrete at both things. By and large, these compared to what we're looking at here, steeper. I think the steepest grade was section was 7.1%. The majority of it being over 5%. Both parts being 5%. So use that for context, I suppose. The treatment that has been proposed for a major cycle pathway. Well used by recreation users and possibly commuters as well. We haven't done any analysis on the volume of cyclists or sheep path users, but certainly much higher use than what we're development in sheep path through 104. Sheet 2 relates to the footpath. I guess I just wanted to emphasize that the footpath along the road in the southern portion is just that it's a footpath as opposed to a sheep path. It's anticipated as before 404 that cyclists will share the traffic movement lanes. And the long section for that is shown on sheet 6 also. 6 and 7. Then moving through to is sheet 4, which is obviously the just been talking about. And this version, revision A was following the conferencing that we did. So you can see, as we've discussed each detail on it, street light at the corner, the addition of 10 metres of seal as we approach right hand, as well as the boundary corner of block 21 being chamfered off at the fence, also adjusting up, which will help with sight lines that you don't have. In addition to that as well, as Mr. Troy pointed out, narrowed the width to 2.5 metres for the entire length. And in terms of the treatment for that path, it's also shown on the long section on sheet 7, showing the sections that are gravel, extended seal area. So that shift. Sheet 8. This is also worth noting that the high point of shared path at the bend at approximate change sheet 50, change 50. We didn't talk about in the conference in the ceiling that area there. That's on the corner, but it's also the high point along that portion of the path. So in terms of your design speeds, that's your lowest speeds. You wouldn't be expecting people to be braking this coming to the top of the hill. And it also does show the treatment that was proposed around the corner with reflectors around the eastern side of the.
So the just to tell the chip seal is that marked in red, the red line, as opposed to being black on the long section.
Yes, correct. Yep. And the remaining portion. These are the northern to Eco Street again, just a footpath, which is, the cyclists will be in the shed movement lane as well, so it's just a footpath. Shed park that has chip seal surface. Sorry, I did miss the flats portion of the 104 as well, which is sheet 3. So that portion to be gravel up the sheet pathway through lot 105, which is the recreation reserve, is to be asphalt. But the rest of it is to be, we're proposing to be just gravel. Yeah, it's showing the long sections on the sheets. 6 and 7.
Can you also just point out while we've got everyone involved in the plans, where the street lighters that you have proposed as a result of the conferencing, and also just if there's any other areas that the respective lights are going in the conferencing.
Yeah, so as agreed conferencing, the street light is to be positioned roughly adjacent to the part that change 10 on the inside of the corner. And that will obviously throw light towards the reflectors as well on the opposite side. Also worth noting that with Mr. Trotter, the street light at the northern end of the park within the road reserves is to be positioned basically the flanking entrance of that sheet path. So it's on sheet or sketch plan. We've shown the street light for the head of the concept, basically flanking this position of the sheet path.
Just being ridiculously picky. And the position of change 0 on your long section D and position of change 0 on your long section E, then they're not in the same position. But they're in the same spot. There's like 10 mil. Between them. So presumably that's just continues the slope down, or what's the?
Yeah, it'll be flat through there.
Essentially flat. So flat from the end of D to the start of. Sorry, to the start of E. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because the grade definitely the starting point for that going upward is change 0 at E. Correct. Okay. So if you got any, and thanks very much for plans and cross sections, with the comparison to the expressway. If you've got any observations to make about the curvature of, I think probably in particular, the southern expressway shared pathway, and servicing by comparison to the shared pathway within the proposed development.
Yeah, I can talk to that. That's probably why I also want to elaborate. Is agreed in the expert conferencing session. Comparative to that particular shared path on the expressway, we're talking about a very low usage. It was up to 5 cyclists per hour at busiest times is what we're anticipating. So in terms of potential for people passing and need to brake urgently, or anything like that, it's probably very low risk as opposed to more Harriet's area than mine. But we certainly considered the use switching.
I think the expressway path would be more along the lines that Neil mentioned previously in terms of having that higher design speed. I mean, people will be expecting to travel through here. You know, it would be, as well as being a recreation, it would have a strong commuter option. And I don't know, I've not cycled it, but I mean, I can easily imagine that at least 20 kilometres an hour, if you've got, you know, clear, like you've probably cycled here himself. So yeah, it is a different context.
I guess it's worth noting that they've used the concrete surface treatment as you come down now. This way one. We've, after talking with us to try to obviously agree to extend the seal portion of the downhill end with chip seal, which Mr. Trotters I understand is happy with. But we have used the same design treatment of sealing that downhill corner.
So, any observations that anybody, I guess, might have about the proximity of the driveway to, which lot is that? Lot 20 and the right hand.
So as we said, there's it wasn't get there in our long section, which probably didn't demonstrate the slope of the area. There is one treatment that we did propose after working with Ms. Fraser, in a variation to the initial concept, was to chamfer the corner of lot 20. So as you're coming down the hill, you can actually see around the bend between approaching cars, so cars coming in here as well. And also widened the bottom of that sheet path to give more room for cyclists to come.
Yeah, I mean, if, for instance, a future landowner planted along that boundary right up to the edge of their driveway, would that create a visibility risk going around that corner? I mean, I suppose it's a question for Ms. Fraser, really.
That's why we put the fence line where it is. So the sight line that we're protecting is on the side where the lighting pole now is. So
Right.
That's the area that we're relying on for the invisibility.
So that provides good
Yes.
sight line as you head into
Yeah.
that
And given that slower sight, you know, it's not for a vehicle to vehicle sight line, you need a longer sight line because everyone's moving faster. But we've got a cyclist coming down and coming around a corner, so they're moving more slowly. And we've got at least a car length clear of as they come out of lot 20, they're in an exposed area. They're not sort of just poking out from behind the fence before they meet your path. So
sure. And for a driver exiting going forward, I guess there would be
they can see up.
they can look back.
Yeah, I mean they're going to have a cyclist for an entering vehicle. They're going to be directly looking at the site. You know, any cyclist approaching is going to be directly on that line of sight.
Is that the intended location of the access into Optimum? Is it? I knew it was also, and it doubles as someone finds themselves going to pull down.
Yeah.
Get stuck back. 3.2.
Correct. It's to try and with the landform through there is quite significant.
Yeah, it rises up to the left of that close driveway. Okay.
This is worth pointing out as well, there will be a safety order.
So what would potentially happen if that safety order found that driveway appeared to be too close to the corner? What's typical in your experience, or what might be possible?
It's Fraser is the one that usually does the audits.
I mean, you could increase the site, like maybe further change the boundary if that was thought necessary, or I'm not sure. Is there a scope to move the driveway to the west?
There is scope.
So in that position, you've got the opportunity of the sight line up the path. So if we move it to the west, then we're actually going to shorten this. We risk shortening the sight line. So
Wouldn't the process be if the safety audit, which would occur before your 224 is issued, picked up that there was a significant issue, it meant that there was a need to alter the scheme plan that consent model would have been.
I mean, the other, sorry, just thinking solutions, but the other thing, I think we're looking, there would be a bollard or something here. I mean, you could actually put in a proper chicane, you could put, like, actually stop the cyclists, so they have to get off and wheel their bike through something. If you're really worried that there was, a speed, you could make it so that they actually have to stop if you were worried about that interaction. So there's definitely.
So if that was something which came out of the safety
There's
audit, then-
definitely tools in the toolkit for addressing something that comes out of that. I'm not an expert in sort of shared path road safety audits, but I do other road safety audits where I'm looking at cyclists and pedestrians. Mr. Trotter's got some experience. I mean, I think it's fairly unlikely that anything's going to get picked up, but it's not impossible. But if it were, there are some tools in the toolkit.
Very good. You could make a issue of anything else. We'll go to Harriet, please, who's prepared a written response, which largely draws on the introduced in her evidence. There's a lot of things he would still be
I think we've discussed a lot of this already, but it's at 1.4, just stating that we, as part of the joint witness statement, we looked at the function and use of the path and largely agreed on that side of things, as the side of the design, with the uses expected to be residents of the proposed subdivision with some use by existing residents of nearby properties. Levels of use are expected to amount to no more than 5 cyclists per hour and 20 pedestrians per hour. I mean, these were very rough estimates that we all felt comfortable that would be the sort of upper end of the usage. So, yeah, really low usage for the path. And as we know, there's some ongoing disagreement in those 3 areas of 3 elements of the design. And I just reinforce here that I don't consider that it's desirable to light the full length of the path, that I consider it best suited for daylight usage. If cyclists choose to use it after dark, they can rely on their lights. And then we've got the next sentence is about the light, agreeing so that it would be beneficial to have a light around the chain age 0. And about the lighting pole at the end of lot 101, which we've already discussed, and that those I've referenced the sketch drawing set that in terms of where those are shown. With regard to the grades, again I'm referencing the sketch drawing set, and note that the gradients, the maximum gradients are 5% or 1 in 20, but these are generally considered accessible grades and I believe that these grades are gentle and will be easy to negotiate for pedestrians and cyclists. And again, this is a comment I brought through from my evidence, that where pedestrians and cyclists on local roads could be expected to negotiate grades of up to 12.5% if they were either the cyclists on the road or a footpath alongside a road. The surfacing, so as we've discussed, proposal is to use crushed compacted gravel with the sealed section is change 0. So we've extended that by 10 meters just to ensure that that the cyclists are on that sealed surface before needing to brake, so that they're not braking on the compacted surface. Given the gently sloping nature of the path, the lack of bends, apart from a change zero, the good forward sight lines along the path, and the low forecast usage with limited interaction between users, I do not consider that the path needs to be sealed on any other sections. I mean, that we've got a path, it has got some slope, but I consider it to be gentle. It's generally fairly straight apart from that one bend. You've got good sight lines between the different users. It's not intended as a high-speed cycle path. And then that we've really got the likelihood that the likelihood of users having to interact is also slow, or low. So we've kind of got everything pointing in the same direction as far as I'm concerned, in terms of a low risk and a low risk of interaction. And if there is an interaction, that it can be safely managed.
No, that's all serious then.
I don't know how we going with the conditions, still waiting.
They should be.
Okay. Do you want to start perhaps on?
Yeah.
You were going to run down on your supplementary.
Yeah, I've got another bit. So.
Yeah. you did it.
Yeah.
Confirming Christopher Hansen. And you prepared this addendum yourself. Yes, and do you have any corrections that you wanted to make?
There is one correction. Now, I've got copies. Everybody see?
No, all good, thanks.
There's one correction. Just as an overview, what I intended on doing is see what I was planning to do is I was going to recap on a couple of points that were brought up through discussion. Not only we had, but you had the public units. Some of the questions, there's only a few points there that I'll clarify. I'm going to cover the matters that the Commissioner has raised in terms of a number of matters said that we haven't carried that through the conditions, etc. So I've got a list there which I'll hand around to you so you can track those for you as you go forward. And I was going to cover the conditions in dispute, but I think if we get compatible to it, we can do that way. And then there's a supplementary bit, so I was going to just very briefly as well. So yeah. No, I was going to start with the other ones up here, which I I will make a change, sorry, I'll just have to run to the supplementary statement. Find it. About this one. 5.7 on page 12. And it's to do with the post and change to information. In 5.7, I indicate there in the second sentence that the applicant has subsequently filed a submission. Just need to change that to intent to file a submission.
Oh, okay.
Despite the fact that one is being prepared and we haven't got to that particular stage yet. So that's, but I will still cover what's intended to be in it. So you're aware of that.
That's good, because I was intending to ask you for a copy.
Yeah, I was intending to have a copy for you.
And I will provide them to clarify.
just before I do go to the detail, what I was going to do was just cover a couple of the key points first off from the evidence. And these are ones I picked up, and so some of them have been dealt with, some of them are fairly minor. I think there's one comment at one stage you made about the grade track being on private land, and what whether the iwi being concerned about. I don't know if you recall saying that. I took a note of it. Again, what I was clarifying there is that we worked closely with Ra Higgett, who was the representative for Aotearoa, the trust in the area. And he's been made aware of it. So I've shown him the plan showing where the track goes, where the grade track is thought to go, where the existing part is, because there's not a lot on the existing part. And so he's aware of that. So I just wanted to clarify that point. I think it might have been in the discussion somewhere along the lines.
Yeah, I have to say from our walk over, and I guess we're keeping our eyes open, but didn't really spot anything that looked like it.
Yeah, you need to, there's on an aerial photo, you might see a little bit of an indentation, etc. I mean, it's something they weren't aware of and they're interested in. There is a stretch on the last part up there that is on the track, and that's why he's keen for that part to be there in some sort of interpretation to occur there, which we're more than happy with. But it is on private land either side. That's fine. There's no requirement. He has not said, I want any of those other sections to have covenants on them or anything like that. He's just aware of it. It's not a high priority sort of find for them, as it were. It's just an interesting find that we'd like to work with on.
So, in your mind, or as you understand the iwi interest, it's more about the general location rather than the specifics of the remnants.
Correct, and it's also the fact that we do have part of our shared part on it, and so that's actually positive.
It's kind of like a continuation of a route.
Correct, and they'd like to be able to tell the story and that connection of it. And that's in the context, the wider context. The key thing they were after was getting reflecting the identity of Te Aotearoa, is the phrase they used in the subdivision. We said, well, how can we do that? This is one of the ways that we can do that, as well as side names of roads and things like that as well. So that was just one. Another was the definition of urban environment versus urban area, and that's been addressed in the second supplementary evidence, and so I won't go back. She'd asked that question afterwards as part of the minutes. And I think the only other one I was going to touch on, and I think we had a discussion on the side, I'm not sure if it sits there, but there was a question of why wasn't there a private land change considered in the early days? And I think we provided some responses to that at the hearing, along the lines of the fact that at the time, GDP, also the area is a large area, but it's a very small area. The southern area, land change is the southern area, and in essence would have been quite, at that stage, quite a lengthy process and quite spots on almost sort of situation. And so that's why, we didn't sort of go down that stage. But I guess from my perspective, it's the other question is whether it's something you really need to mind to, i.e. what alternatives. And I think at this stage we've got a non-compliant activity. I don't know if there's any, and the other thing I think which Ms. Tankpot mentioned in discussing it as well is that probably best was an RDA, which would have been in the consent process anyway. And so potentially comes for a long length main change process. So there's numerous ones like that. I'll hand out. Do you have any questions on?
On the verbal commentary? No,
Okay.
That's fine.
I'll hand out for you a tracking record, as I put it. Because we did, and the discussions, and I took notes of it all, and so did Ms. Hancock, raised quite a number of things. You said, what about? So this is trying to pull those. You asked this question of Ms. Wright and I, whether you felt that, or we felt that the definition of builder and structure was sufficient. And we discussed that in our conferencing, and we looked at the conditions and we looked at the definitions, and we both came to the same conclusion that we considered it did, that the definitions we have in both the plan and the RMA. And then what we're trying to achieve in the condition. So that's a confirmation of that. You asked for identification of the lizard conditions, whether it had a consent notice and how would it be looked after, who's responsible. So now the conditions that will come through to you, you can check them out. But conditions 19, 21, 78 and 79 covers that. So there's now no requirement consent notice, etc. And there's hopefully clear understanding of who's responsible for what. Pest control, I've listed them all through there. So again, this is what came out of the conferencing. I know we've been concentrating on disputed bits, but we got a long way as well on all these other matters. And so that's where they're all covered, and you'll see they're to do with the lot 5, which is the lizard area. That's condition 21. There's the CMP. What's required in there? There's pest control in lot 200. There's pest control of the stormwater disposal system. Animal pest control in lot 5. Pest plant. Pest control in the pest plant control in the wetland buffers. The ecological management plan, and then the Canuka stands. So all those conditions there have
Seems like quite an extensive
Lots of.
well, it always was.
response to a reasonably simple question, I suppose. Yes.
Well, they were all there, but you were asking for them.
Yeah.
And so instead of taking you through them all now, I'm just pulling them all out. And so it has been a comprehensive response, and of course we get submissions on.
Yes.
And so we've dealt with it, but it's all, and it's been proposed through the various experts as well. And so it's a question of whether we capture them in the conditions and experts.
That we currently covered off, or earlier covered off in a broader condition that dealt with that, so they've dropped
So
down into the specific condition that they want.
there's a question of Waka Kotahi. Was that covered through? That is carried through in condition 56. So that's just clarifying that. And there's also the wayfinder signs that the secretary person recommended, and that's in condition 76B, and that's to lot 94. You asked the question, is there purpose for management plans and targets where possible? Why haven't I got that there? All of the conditions to do with management plans, which for some reason I thought I'd included in there, now have a note in it, either in the beginning or a note that says the purpose of this management plan is. Here it is. Sorry, it's that first purpose of management plans. It should be the 2 down. Purpose of management plans. Conditions 38 at the CMP, 73 the construction plans, traffic management plan, a landscape plan for the lizard and ecology. So again, this right and I went through there, and we penned a purpose, which is primarily from, so that's a clear purpose of what the plans to achieve, and then there's how we'll do that. You asked how the Greater Wellington conditions are consistent with the KCD one, and so I've listed all the conditions there that have either in the condition or in an advice note relationship there. So that's all covered. You asked about all MPs and safety audits have to be prepared by certified qualified persons, and so there's 2 conditions there that covered that. And again, it was in there already, but we just didn't want to have that discussion. There was a question of Ahihanga Road intersection needed its own condition. That's condition 68. And that was something that I raised. It wasn't in there, and it should be. There was more trees included in the southern area and a new plan, and that's part of the Rev R now. It's been called into that. So that's the condition 1 plans.
Right. Okay.
And so that's coloured area in there. That
So this is on one of these plans here?
yes.
Just making a distinction between the building exclusion and the planting strip.
So
Just to make sure.
so it's been amended now. So the orange area is the planting, and the earthworks. Yeah. There's another plan shows the planting.
That's
The hatch
It's got
Green.
Oh, sorry, it's come through there,
Yeah.
yeah, that was orange in the past, so it was hard to work out on the previous plan exactly what was what, so now we've got the patch area and planted.
So it would be earthworked and then once it's been earthworked, it'll be planted and protected, so like people, practices and
So-
to protect that.
Sure. So that's the, was that the 5 metre landscape strip you're talking about?
Correct, it's in the,
Right.
yeah.
Sure, sure.
So that's clarified. Condition 75 has the construction traffic numbers capped, and I think you referred to it in the joint station transport that's been brought into condition 5. 44 Tico Street, that's the condition that is right and discussed. I appreciate comments she's making. Is it good practice or whatever from a condition? No. But it's offered up by the applicant in response to the meetings and discussions we had with them. So the applicant indicated they would be retained until the works were over. That's as far as it goes. So I guess from that perspective, it was offered up for a specific purpose and then it's been brought into that. Now, if at the end of the day, as commissioners, you decide one, well, it's not necessary because the effects aren't there, and it gets removed, that's not a problem from my perspective. If you decide it should be in there and then try to put specific measurements around it, I think that would be something we have to really work through because it was an intended purpose just for us until the end of the earthworks, and it was just to replace anything that may have been lost either by health of it falling over or whatever, but also particularly along the Golden. So we're just trying to keep it quite narrow, but I do accept it's written in a way that from a council enforcement perspective, not.
But do you think it's capable of being resolved?
I think
Reading wise?
what I say is at the moment it reflects the agreement that was provided, and what the applicant agreed to do was bring what was agreed to into a condition. Let's try to do that.
I think we're also in a position now where, that the applicant made that offer as a result of discussions with the storages. The storages seem to be various different positions that we're hearing in relation to what they would like to see in the dog leg, and what they want with the planting, and obviously not all of that is acceptable to the applicant, so it's a bit of a halfway house. We did an input from Ms. Blackwell, Chris, on the suitability of that condition from their perspective, because it doesn't make sense for the applicant to be offering something that's totally unacceptable in the other way.
Well, I think that particular condition, I mean, I think we probably need to read the joint witness statement. But the applicant, sorry, on behalf of the submitter, Ms. Blackwell is asking for a number of other ones in there. I'm not sure. Is there a reference in that particularly to the conditions for them from?
Yes, there was.
And that was, sorry, remind me.
Last page. I'm gonna, that's what I was looking for. Did actually require some along that area, and then indeed mentions a few other conditions.
So from your perspective, it's more to do with not going as far as the submitter would want, but not including anything which the submitter would be opposed to. Can I express that properly?
Yes, I think we're in the difficult position that the applicant has tried to offer, or has made an offer of a condition that they're proposed that they think is workable. It's demonstrating how far they're prepared to go to mitigate something which I think we probably all agree is part of the permitted. From a technical perspective, probably take the same view as this one, that it's not necessary, but regardless of that, the offer's been made. That is being volunteered, that's the offer. there's nothing further that we need to work on clarity, I think that should be the person, Mr. Heston, Ms. Rowland, because obviously that it's volunteered.
Yeah.
Sorry, that didn't make a lot of sense.
No, no,
Because
no,
it's
no, no.
volunteered, I
Well-
think we need to separate.
Would what has been volunteered be a subset of what? Yeah. Sorry.
Oh,
This is
Mr. Bitter.
Sorry.
I believe so, but it's been very difficult to pin down exactly what
Okay.
they're after.
Okay.
It's probably as far as I can. Yeah, I think they're after a whole load of other things. I'm not quite sure where Ms. Stackwell has landed on it, but we might know once we've had it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, one discussion we had in that conference then was the fact that it's obviously just a landowner, property owner thing that should be sort of outside the project. If you know what I mean, the consequence of the project it's the sort of thing that needs to be dealt with anyway. And it's, I think Taylor provided a diagram at the hearing that showed that some of the canopy will demonstrates how the work with some of the trees along the longer area 19, and some of them are going to be on Eco Street. It may need to be removed. So there's a joint opportunity there as well. But what the condition was trying to do was just to say, while we're doing the works and while the subdivision everything happening, if anything fell down, got wind blown or health wise had to take down, and or due to the works that need to be done, be removed, then to be liaising with
Because there was some concern about cutting through the roots, etc.
correct.
I think wasn't it?
Yeah, and so it was really a offer to liaise with 44 to find appropriate replacement. So that's what it really was. But it's hard to write it.
If you were going to do it as a condition, might I suggest it be linked to construction effects? So if it's linked to the fact that there may be vegetation loss as a result of construction activities, and I think that's a really clear test.
But the submitter or Ms. Blackwell on behalf of the committee was worried about safety. The fact that there would be lives. So anyway,
So are you?
We could have another thing about it.
Yeah. And are you going to run that by Ms. Blackwell?
at this stage, you have a joint witness statement that has various views in it. You have so that's their episode. It's still a dispute, I guess.
All right. Okay. So that's recorded here. Maybe we can go to that to understand that.
Very full.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Yeah.
need a lot more clarity. Actually.
And the last one was about unsuitable material, which again, commission. So that's just as I said, I put it as a record for you of all the things I collected as we had discussions.
And I think there was one bullet point I think you did more than this, which is the CTMP, just below the management plan stuff.
Oh, sorry, yes, so CTMP, we indicated that there was possibly a need to have a communication with the community to find out such things as they drop off times and things like that onto the street. So that's now been added in the condition 73L, a requirement that's in the CTMP that they will complete a process by which there's a communication. So that was identified as perhaps gap.
Yeah, well, that's useful. That's good.
I was going to take you to the second supplementary, and I guess it's. I'm not sure whether you had a chance and you'd like to me to just very briefly summarise it then put in a question. What I've tried to do, and obviously you've got those writings as well, provide all the provisions, so they're attached, that you've identified, summarise them, and then provide an analysis of them. And I think it was That's right. So it was actually quite an interesting exercise, really, from a planner's perspective, because it starts to reveal, as it were, changing planning environment outside the application. But it's something that you obviously are having to put your minds to. And so I have the integrated assessment at the end, which is perhaps the best place to take you, which takes you through the summary of it. Perhaps that will lead us to other.
Your page 20, yeah?
Correct, yes. So that was a request you had in paragraph 5 of note 2.
Yes, I think we thought it was going to be rather complicated, so a wrap up might be useful.
So that's where it got to, because quite unsurprisingly, if you consider each planning by itself, and I don't know where that's you looked at the NPS and then you looked at even the RPS and 1, and then come back down to and change 2, and you start to get a bit it is quite interesting. Now, just to say that this tangible, as you refer to your submission, legal submission is going to cover quite a bit from a case law perspective. But where I got to as a result of looking at all this was at the NPS urban development, and particularly, obviously, it was amended as well this year, does provide quite a bit of guidance to you at that higher level, and I've listed there particularly objective 1, which is a very similar assessment as part 2 in terms of enabling or social, economic, etc. People to be able to sustainably manage their urban areas, yes, is a part of it. Policy 1 ensures that planning decisions contribute to the well-functioning urban areas, which you asked us to look at the definition of, etc. And then policy 6 provides very useful guidance, and I noticed that its particular regard has to be given to it, so I've provided in my analysis of it what that might mean in terms of there's no descending order, as a word, of those matters. They're not connected, they're not contiguous. So obviously you get consideration to them and weight to them. You have the discretion to discard them. So feel that way in terms of once you consider them. But they are the decision makers, and it seems the way I look at it, it's more than just the plan writers, but it's at this level as well, from that perspective. And so that's an interesting thing for you. And it also reflects changes to areas that can be expected of the plan built environment. And these changes themselves, in themselves, are not considered an adverse fit, which I found, again, that's quite useful guidance. The definition of urban environments in there as well. And so I think, there's certainly quite a bit of guidance for you there. Looking at and I follow on to Te Tupu Pai there in terms of the growth strategy, and I identify that it is primarily the MDRS that it's intended to implement. But it does provide further guidance to addressing housing requirements, and it goes on. Now, it's been confirmed it's not an EPS, but when the picture starts to become more clear is when you look at the RPS, which brings an interim period. So again, you have the ability to consider this and provide, and to the point that you can or may or may not decide that you can get confidence that that's the way this growth strategy is going, and you are able to consider it even though it's not an EPS under the higher level RPS. So again, I'm a little bit ad-libbing here, but that's the sort of way it starts to sort of connect together. And so from that perspective, it's, it does give, you know, allows you to give weight to it in that sense. Obviously, you'll be working out how much. But, you know, in my opinion, and I guess the key thing when looking at this particular application is whether the site meets the classifications that were used in interest for greenfields going forward. When you look at the RPS, it all goes as far as saying, and by the way, if it's not anticipated or whatever, it shouldn't stop you doing it anyway. It's going to be meeting UD's UD requires. So
that's and it should back up there as well.
It does, and so, and I mean, we're not used to this as planners having a higher level thing saying, oh, by the way, go for it, which is almost what it's saying, or could be interpreted to say. You know, and that's quite so again, the RPS plan change one has to go through a process, statutory process, it has to be considered where it's at in the process, etc. That's the messages that sort of giving. So it's interesting coming out of the regional council, and I'm sure you're probably considering these things in wider projects as well from that perspective. Proposed PC2, which is the intensification, which is has also been, as you know, notified of submissions closing on April 15th. It's interesting because it starts to bring in some of the NPS urban development requirements, but not necessarily to the same degree that I think that PC1, the RPS is anticipating. So now you've got a problem of the NPS, the RPS plan change, and that's supposed to be implemented by PC2, which came up before PC1. And when you look at PC2 in the context of what plan change 1 RPS is anticipating, I know, my opinion, and I've gone through some of this, it doesn't actually quite hit the mark. And why I say that is that some of the requirements of the NPS have been put in, for example, the explanation, as opposed to an actual provision and some things like that. So again, it makes it very interesting reading a PC2 once you've looked at PC1 and the NPS, and then how does that apply to this particular development that's in front of you at the moment?
So you've, in your opinion, PC2 is at some risk of change through the submission and hearing process because of its degree or not of consistency with RPS PC1.
Yes. Now, how that helps you, I'm not quite sure. But
it all helps, honestly.
Yes, but it comes back to fundamentals, which I think this can probably explain what's the high order documents and where are they going and what are you likely to, and then how does that apply? Now, the way I think the other matter that I raised here is that the current objectives and policies still reflect the B12 2012 PDP, which is consolidation in existing urban areas or identified, etc. And I see when you're reading the UPSUD that was changed earlier in the year, and then with PC1, yes, and then even PC2 to a degree, it's moving away from that quite a bit. So that's another element that I think you as commissioners will be weighing up in terms of where is this going as I look as we look at this. And so from that perspective, I think, and I think that's right. I said we had discussions with ourselves. There's a lot of rabbit holes, dark ones that you can go down that you have to come back out of and think, you know, so where's this going? And it's, yeah, I don't envy your position from that perspective. But I think it's really helpful to, again, just step back and say, right, we have these happening, these are high, this is high level, this isn't, this might be challenged to a degree, where does it sit in the process, etc. And that'll give you, I think, some confidence going forward. So I didn't follow this very well. I'm more than happy if there's any questions or anything in here that you want to. Okay. So just one point that this Ken got raised, and I think it came in one of your minutes where, sorry, one of your points in your minutes that you said about the whole site, but it was the southern area. And I think, as I've said in here, I don't think it's relevant per se to consider them that way. It's not one activity, even in all their area doesn't apply. And so when you start looking at how to look at these different planning instruments, I don't think they don't distinguish in that sense to give you any sort of guidance on whether you should be looking at this area versus that area. Going forward, and if it was a greenfield development, then it could all be quite different in the future in terms of what might look like. Now, I think I raised in here the fact that plan change 2 has a number of supporting documents, indices, and in there is the proper greenfield assessment.
Yep.
And in there's a wider, and I included it in the last page. So this is another element that you can consider.
Yes, no, I mean, I've certainly gone to those.
And
There's
that's
two.
the
There's
08.
a part 1 and part 2, isn't there?
Yeah.
At the bottom.
Yeah, I guess what I got out of this is OH1, which and 2, which straddles the expressway as a whole area in the future that is a potential development area. To determine these areas and others, it's used a set of what I've termed avoidance criteria.
Although they don't use that word, do they?
No, they don't. No, that, I said I've used, and I put it in. In other words, these areas have been, they've looked at all the constraints that you need to avoid, and they said, well, these areas look good. So, I mean, I read that as saying, okay, that's not, doesn't give it, there's nothing there that surprises us, I guess, in terms of when we've looked at this. And the particular site has been through assessment of all those sorts of things anyway. So the site's ahead of the game from that perspective. The other question I had when I looked at this, and it said structure plan, and I understand that, and the size of the scale of this area, I support that approach. I think it's correct. Next question is if as commissioners would be if you were to approve this, consent in front of you, does that inhibit or cause any problems in the future before we're going forward for a structure plan?
That's certainly where my mind was heading.
Yes. And so my thoughts on that were that across the northern and southern areas and the sort of densities we're talking about is going to be less than the current examples that are happening in the residential zone. Then it's not a situation where you'd be allowing something down below. That means a structure plan comes in and you shouldn't have allowed that. If you know what I mean. The densities and all that are higher than potentially you could have in the future if you went through a structure plan process. So that was one sort of thought I had, so that you're in a sense not inhibiting that sort of approach. It doesn't have any bearing in my mind in terms of connectivities and all those sorts of things. It's got its own roads and all that. So it could ideally sit within a structure plan process almost as it is. And so I put in here, I went into this sort of process of working out whether by approving that you are causing any sort of future issues. And I think it would fit into the process that this is like to go through.
Have you spelled that out in your opinion here?
I have, yes. I've talked about, I didn't see it and everything in any way.
Yeah. As Commissioner said, that's in 5.6, where you say, in this perspective, granting consent for the subdivision.
Yeah.
Before you now will not impede or inhibit any future plan change or structure plan process.
Yes.
Yeah, and I actually did have that as a question, so it's fine to jump in. And whether it's your experience or the team's experience, how likely is that? I mean, if the subdivision goes ahead and people develop the northern part, and they do it in their own way, is it really likely that, or have you seen that where there could be additional dense further residential subdivision?
Yeah, I don't
Actually occur.
Well, I think it's an interesting situation in terms of existing areas that are getting the use out applied over them. And I heard the other day saying that amenity in the future is going to be privileged. And that was like, I know it's a sobering thought, but that was the statement that was made, which is implying that it could happen anywhere, and it's only those areas that don't want it to happen that can afford to keep their large section of their house in the middle and say, I'm not going to, you know. So that's an extreme case. So I think what we have here, obviously you've got a proposal in front of you, a consent in front of you, and a subdivision application in front of you. It's, in my mind, it's exactly the same as existing residential areas, which in the future are now getting applied to new things. Some will, some won't. I mean, there's already been a small subdivision, non-defined activity subdivision, very close to it. It's just been approved for lot sizes that are 6,000.
About 4,000, 6,000.
Yeah, that's a period. So that's a very small one. So that's right close to this site. Whether that could be subdivided, possibly the people buying those sections, and I think in some ways that's almost what's the intent.
I mean, the council's still granting consents for rural sections in this area up until the last ones for August last year, still this year. So if the council had any concerns about retaining that area for infrastructure, they to really think about whether that was.
Yes, particularly in the northern area, there are quite significant constraints around building forms as well. Yeah.
I've for a long time elected for Maypole,
There are.
the Rara,
Yeah.
and I mean, obviously that yes creates a potentially different tokens, but they advanced public plan change in conjunction with council in 2007 structure. Very little development has occurred yet, and that structure plan ended up getting picked up through various district plan reviews and changed by the council, meaning that they've spent, the owners of that property subsequently sold, but spent a lot of time actually trying to retain the integrity of fighting to keep these structure plans in the district plan rather than actually getting the development. So, and it's been my experience in other locations, structure plans often aren't everything that they make up to be, and the need starts to allow to make them work into actually see development in the area. So whether there's a high level one, whether there's highlights that's not there, whether it's more of an infrastructure framing that sits with the long-term plans as well, isn't included in the future, but it definitely isn't the often the very quick solution that's been that they're often worded out to be.
Yeah, and I think the messages I read from the office study and this etc. is that this area is a future development area that's been identified through looking at the assessment criteria that they've used. So in the future, at the moment, there's a highlight. Okay. And I think the T2 by growth strategy is another one that reflects the need to identify greenfield sites and do plan change. It doesn't necessarily that structure plan change. So going forward, I think that's what context of.
It's also just to note, it's not greenfield siting that it's totally unoccupied. It doesn't have different ownership patterns that are already established. So it's very different than creating an entirely new suburb from scratch, say it's a farm site compared to structure planning for an area where we've already got that pattern, separate ownership in roads and things like that, which we can't have that too.
Yeah, I mean, if you picked up where the actual site is on, I know there's a coloured.
Oh, yeah, no, I no, see where it is. Yeah,
so it's pretty well dead centre, so it does go broader in that sense.
Yeah, it's a pretty big area. Yeah.
And as I said, I fully agree that a structured plan approach is probably a good way to go forward on that, looking forward to planning for all sorts of things, including connectivity and volume. But my conclusion at the end of the day is that consent was granted and that area was developed, then it would just slip into that whole wider process. And would cause I don't think it inhibits it or stops that sort of approach. And it may be decided that, like what we call the northern at the moment, should stay that way because it adds a character in there. Or I don't know, you don't know where a structure plan approach might go. And the people, obviously, if there's individual people in there, they'll have various views as well, or how they want to go. Which is my comment about some areas are going to not want to take on the ability to intensify in others' books.
I suppose what we've just been talking about is the opinion you expressed on that runs counter to the council officer's response to what the comments, initial comments on the draft of PC2. You lodged a submission on that.
Yeah, so I can, what I was intending on doing was giving you a brief sort of summary of where that submission is intending on going.
That would be really interesting.
And so the first one obviously is is that the applicants wanting to ask for the, so that the current plan changes the rezones some land that's rural zone and also lifestyle to residential, residential and other areas up in Narara and down south, so those top areas. The first thing you asked for is that this area be included in that.
So effectively general residential.
Yeah, going forward, it's asking the question. It's following the thing that is through my evidence as well, that all the work's been done. If you look at T25 as a growth strategy, it says that there are areas that we identify that need further investigation and also need more infrastructure in order to happen. And they are meeting priority. And we're still working on it. We've done we've looked at constraints and we've assessed them, and we've also determined that the infrastructure is in place to service, so they're providing infrastructure. So
question, is this intended a submission to seek general residential for the entire area we're talking about?
No, we're talking about the application side. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, as opposed to the
as
01.
The
north and south area.
Right. So so all of that actually.
Yeah, well, that's the starting point. And also have their site identified and the various conditions that are addressed accordingly. But the submissions also looked at a number of the key objectives and policies that.
So you've got Chico Street West. Chico Street West.
Yeah, so Chico Street West is currently general residential, and that's getting the RS provisions implemented on it. So they have implement that.
Yeah.
So that's how close the plan change goes. And so so that's part of the reasoning that why leave this part out, or it's right next to it, so that they're doing it again. And it's also looking at objective DO3, that's the district objectives, and 11, and policies to do with informed development that currently don't align with, that have the consolidation approach and don't align with the plan change. Two of our peers and new peers and saying that they need to change as well to provide that wider context by which you consider any sense. So that's a general sort of thrust of the
You go.
This is rabbit hole stuff.
Yeah.
But just a question, I guess, is the council inviting submissions on other possible areas for rezoning, or is there going to be scope issue and on?
Well, so the current plan change includes new areas. And so it didn't stick to just existing. So because the plan changes, and so it starts off by saying it's meeting or APE or something like that. But then it includes area and it's primarily just bringing the MB REs in. Sorry. Bringing those in, but then it is also introducing new areas to rezone them as part of the plan change. So
Relatively small tack-ons. By
Excellent.
comparison. By comparison.
No, some of them are some of them are too far moved what we're looking at with you. So it's not out of the size is not. Yes, there's an area, Marara way, which and they are near or adjoining or close to existing residential as well. So yeah, so they're invite. So in that sense, if they've included them in there, so we're rezoning these as well. So those landowners as well. Submissions and if they agree with it or not. That would be the reason.
So just to recap, the submission that you've put in or are going to put in on PC2, seeking the entire area of this consent application to go to general residential. And it has parallels with what you think is already in PC2 in terms of other bits of land.
Yeah. Now, obviously, at the end of the day, it's the best formal process.
Yeah, sure.
So where it ends up, we don't know. And then at the end of the day, whether that makes any. In the meantime, if things started and the solution happens, maybe not relevant. But that's what the applicant considers at this stage. It's a strategic move.
They are very cyclical.
No, appreciate that. Yeah, but you know, in terms of background and context for us, generally very important. I think you know the next day. I made a bunch of underlinings and stuff in your supplementary response, but I don't know whether any of that actually is a really question to the questions to myself.
Hopefully they were interested and informed.
I think this is mostly just markers to myself as to things.
Yeah, and I've included the actual wording of the policies of what and you can see the changes in it. You know, when you read them in that context, it is quite to see. Now, whether they stay, obviously both PC2 and PC1, the RGS are and whether they stay the same or whether they're more in line with the MPS, I don't know whether they'll shift it.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, said it before, say it again. This is just all really helpful. You know, just pulling the threads together, well, as much as the threads can be pulled together.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we've gone down enough rabbit holes.
Sorry,
There's a
perhaps
few on the side.
an unfortunate term to use when we talk about pest control.
Yeah, we got a real schooling on the natural pest control. Going out on site. Wow. We didn't fall down anything, but keep our eyes open.
Before we go to next, I'm just wondering if there just might want to put a break. It's called directly. And I was going to suggest maybe just a little bit of time so that the rest of the afternoon runs sufficiently. I did give you a memo this morning. Useful if you like to have a read of it, because it is quite, I find sometimes when you're talking through those weights and tests and things, it's quite dense. And it might be more useful to actually think quietly rather than read through the notes. If that works, then we've also got conditions and the things.
We do a half hour break. Is it all right?
I think that would make the rest of the afternoon go more efficiently if we stop to do that.
Okay.
Just before we do, while I remember, Commissioner Kendrick, you had some questions around whether the hearing, before the hearing adjourned, around the lizard habitat a long time ago.
Yes.
And what was, I think your question was, you were after a little bit of an understanding as to what was going to happen there, how it worked, and the interaction between the Wildlife Act approvals and management plan there and this consent. So I have actually got Wildlands, I'm going to call him the lizard guy, just because I've lost the technical term from my mind.
Herpetologist.
That's it, thank you. Trent has provided that we're unable to witness a witness of his death. So it got a little bit tricky down there via Zoom. So he has prepared a memorandum that gives you a bit of a rundown as to that. If you've got any questions about it, I'm happy to see the responses. It's really just, again, probably useful background as to what you can expect to be covered in the adjacent process. So shall we?
Yeah, shall we come back at 3:15? That's okay.
Yeah, we're doing that.
He's good face to face, I think, but I think, yeah, it's probably that.